how do we prove that triangles are congruent? That's what we want to talk about in this video. So say we got two triangles here like this, and let's say we knew that these two sides were congruent, these two sides were congruent here, these were congruent over here, these angles were congruent, and these angles were congruent here, and one more, these guys were congruent here. So if we knew all the angles were congruent to these and all the sides were congruent to these, then the triangles would have to be congruent. But that's a lot of information. So we're going to talk about ways that we can figure out a lot easier or a lot quicker to find out that these two triangles are congruent. We got side, 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 angle, and angle, angle, side. These are 4 ways to prove that triangles are congruent without going through all of that information that we just talked about. So the first way to prove that triangles are congruent is called side, side, side. So if we know that this side is congruent to this side of the triangle is congruent to this side, and this side here is congruent to this side. In other words, all 3 sides of this triangle are congruent to all 3 sides of this triangle. Then those two triangles would have to be congruent. We don't need to know anything about the angles. So that is good enough. We can say for sure that this triangle over here is congruent to this triangle over there. Okay? So that's nice. Let's maybe say this. We've got triangle 1, triangle 2. So we might say triangle 1 is congruent to triangle 2. That's enough. And that's called the side, side, side postulate. Don't need to know anything about the angles. Now, what if we know something like this? What if we know that this side is congruent to this side of these triangles, this side is congruent to this side, and we've got the angle that's in between them, or we call this the included angle. This angle is included in both of these sides. Well, if we have this situation, notice I haven't told you anything about the third side. Well, that happens to be enough true, too. That's enough to say that triangle 3 and triangle 4, triangle 3 is congruent to triangle 4. So these two triangles have to be congruent. That is a side angle side postulate. Okay? 2 sides and 1 angle that's in between are congruent to 2 sides and an angle between. The triangles are congruent. We've got 2 more situations now. What if we knew that this side was congruent to this one? We had this angle here, we were told is congruent to this angle, and we're also told that this angle is congruent to this angle. Well, we can kind of tell by the way this looks that this triangle is just rotated around to get this triangle. And if we think for a moment, if we set this side the same length as this side, and then we fix these angles congruent here, we fix these 2 angles congruent, well, they're going to meet at the same point, and the triangles are going to be congruent. So we call that the angle side angle postulate. Okay, saying if 2 angles and the included side are congruent to 2 angles and the included side in another triangle, then the 2 triangles are congruent. So we could say that triangle 5 and triangle 6, triangle 5 is congruent to triangle 6. Okay? Well, what if, well, first of all, here we had the side was in between these 2 angles. Well, what if we got a situation like this, where here I know that these 2 sides are congruent, and I've got this angle over to the left that's congruent to this one over here, and let's say this big obtuse angle here is congruent to this big obtuse angle. Well, is this drawing down here, is this drawing angle side angle? No, it's not, because we've got 2 angles, but the side is not in between. So this side right here is not between these 2 angles. So it's not angle side angle that we had up above here. Okay? So if we think for a moment, well, if these two angles are congruent to these 2 angles, well, the leftover angle would have to be congruent. And so we can prove that, yeah, if we have these 2 angles and the side that's not in between them, this can become angle side angle with a little bit of work. And so yes, this is enough to prove that these triangles are congruent. So if this is triangle 7 and this is triangle 8, we could say that triangle 7 is congruent to triangle 8. Alright, and that is what we call angle side. Again, notice that the side is not between the two angles. Alright, and so those are our postulates. And notice we have some abbreviations. We can call this SSS, SAS, ASA and AAS. So these are our nicknames for these. Now let's see how they work. Let's go through a few simple examples. Now we're proving that these triangles are congruent. We're not writing a whole formal proof here, okay? But we got 3 steps. We want to list the congruent parts, write a triangle congruent statement, and then we want to state why the congruence is true with one of our postulates. So let's go ahead and do that here. So first thing we know is we got some given information. We know that dx is congruent to zy, and that's given to us. Then by these marks over here, 2 single marks, we know that dz is congruent to x, y. That's right. So these 2 marks tell us that. So we got 2 congruent sides. Now that's not enough. We need a little more information. So if we look carefully, we notice this. This side, zx, is in this first triangle, and zx is also in this triangle. So it's in both triangles, but it's the same length. So we could say that this is, let's pick a number, it's 3 inches long, depending on your computer screen. It's 3 inches long for this triangle, and it's 3 inches long over here. So since it's in both triangles, we can say that zx is congruent to zx. Now, these here were what we call given. Okay? These are given information. We were told that. Okay? But this one here, this is true because of what we call the reflexive property. Okay? Reflexive property says that something's congruent to itself. Let's see if I can spell. Alright? So we have 3 congruent parts. So we can do part B here. We can say that triangle DXZ is congruent to triangle. Now we've got to be careful here. We've got to get the order right. D corresponds to Y. So we can say D. And X, this X corresponds to this Z down here. So Z. And then in the left triangle, this Z corresponds to this X over here. So we say X. There's our congruent statement. And now we've got to have a reason. And our reason is the side postulate. So there's one. Let's look at another example. We're going to do the same steps here. We've got some different information. Now the triangle setup looks the same, okay, but notice we've got different information. We've got 2 sides are congruent and 2 angles. So let's start by listing our given. This is a good way to go. Start by listing the given information. Triangle X, I'm sorry, not triangles, we're doing sides here. So DZ is congruent to X, Y. Alright? And then we also know some angles. Angle DZX, we've got to name that with 3 letters. Can't just name it with 1. Is congruent to angle YXZ. Alright? So we've got 2 angles are congruent. These 2 guys here. Okay. And so we need something else, and we have this one right here that we can mark congruent. Like we said before in the last example, that one's congruent by the reflexive property. So we can say again that ZX is congruent to XZ. And it's important that you go ahead and mark this. Okay? Go ahead and mark this. Now we can see we've got side and an angle and a side, and they're in that order. So we've got side, angle, side. That's good. So we can say triangle DY, that's a Z, sorry about that. Let's go triangle DZX is congruent to triangle YXZ. Z. Again, be careful with the order. But now this time it's by side angle side. Okay, let's try another one. Here we've got a little different situation. Same instructions up here. Let's go ahead and mark our given. We can say angle B is congruent to angle R. Okay, let's try that looking. Alright, that's given to us right here and here. And now we can also say that we got some more given. We know that RS is congruent to side BS. Alright, so this side is congruent to this side right here. Now 2 pieces is not enough information, so we look around and we say, is there anything else that we can say? Well, since we have intersecting lines here like this, that tells us something, gives us a little clue that this angle here has to be congruent to this one because of vertical angles. So we know that angle DSB is congruent to angle RST. And that's by vertical angles. So now we have our 3 pieces of information. That's good enough. And looking at the drawing, we've got an angle, side, and an angle. So we can say that triangle DBS is congruent to triangle TRS. And watch out for the order there. The reason is angle, side, angle. Okay? So there's a different way to prove triangles congruent, and we got one more. So we're moving on through our triangle congruence examples here, and we've seen side, 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 side angle, side, and angle, side angle. Well, here we have another example, same drawing from last time, but we got different given information. So let's start by listing our given. Angle D is congruent to angle T. That's given to us. And then we have RS is congruent to BS. That's given to us. Now notice this is a different angle than we had in the last example. You can rewind and check that one if you want. But we've got different angles here. And just like in the last example, whenever we have these intersecting lines, well, that gives us some more information. We have this angle is congruent to this one by vertical angles. So let's list that. Angle DSB up top here is congruent to angle TSR. There's our 3 parts. Now we ask ourselves, is that good enough? Does that prove triangles congruent? We've got an angle on angle, and this side is not between the angle, so yes, we can say that. We got angle, angle, side, so we can say triangle DSB is congruent to triangle TSR. And we got to give a reason by angle, angle, side. Notice the side is not between these 2 angles, so when we write it here, the S is not between the 2 A's. Alright? So again, to wrap it up, we have 4 ways to prove triangles congruent. We have side, 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 angle, side, side, angle, and angle, angle, side. And the process is look for all the given information, look for any other clues we have, and see if that's enough to say that the triangles are congruent, and we've got to give a reason. So good luck.